Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Special Education Advisory Panel. I'm Sandy Holloway, and I have been appointed by Bessie to represent you on this committee. So, welcome, everybody. I hope to get to meet each one of you soon. As we move forward, we will begin on time, and we will begin with the item call to order and roll call, please.
Mr. Bayham? Malika Morgan. Thank you. Leslie Calloway? Sandy Holloway?
Here.
Aaron Downing? Dr. Sally Rose Gaglion? Rebecca Huff? Brandy Hooling? Dejanay Clark Jackson? Carolyn Jurich? Ashley McReynolds? Angela Miles? Dr. Donna Reno? Julia Tanner? Michael Thompson? Reginald Washington? Dr. Jessica White? Alveda Willis? Foxy? Dr. Paul? And Miss Christy Gonzalez.
Thank you, Kristen.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to our March SEAP meeting. I know with session in and some Baton Rouge traffic, things have been a little bit busy this morning, so we certainly appreciate you all being here. Counting right now, I don't think we have a quorum. And so a meeting without a quorum of the membership present, it does not constitute a meeting in which business can be conducted and motions will not be recorded. However, our agency will present the information that's outlined on the agenda you have, and we will have discussion amongst our members present, as well as public comments being accepted. And of course, before we begin, just a reminder to all of our to all of our members, as well as anyone making a public comment, our meeting is being live streamed, so please talk directly into a microphone when speaking. And also, if we have any guests here with us today that wish to offer a public comment, we have public comment cards over there in between the double doors, those blue comment cards. So simply fill one out and then turn it into a member of our staff. Of course, comments will be heard for each agenda item. So those wishing to offer multiple comments should fill out a card for each item. And then, of course, in order to provide the efficient use of our time, because we do have a very large agenda today, we might alter the amount of time given to our speakers to ensure that all public comments are heard. I think, Ashley, yeah.
Just a quick question. The proposed changes to the bulletins, are they still going to go to Bessie whether or not we gain a quorum and are able to provide feedback, or
Yes.
is that still the plan, is to submit them?
Yes,
Okay.
to our April Bessie.
Okay,
Yes.
thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, so our first item on the agenda, this is simply a review from our SEAP meeting that was held in November. Remember, we had a wintry weather storm come through for January. So,
For you.
no, just go into our first approval. So everyone should have the agenda and the minutes from our November 13th meeting in your folder. I'll give everyone some time to review that report. Do we have any discussion around this November report? Okay, any public comments? All right. Seeing and hearing no discussion or public comments, we will move to our second agenda item. And
Okay, clarified. We were on item number 2 and for approval. Were there any objections to the minutes? And if not approved, we go on to next item, which is new business. Lauren?
thank you. So we'll move to that agenda item 2. It is our new business. The first item here, let me change our slide. It's revisions to our bulletins regarding our differentiated monitoring and support reports. So these proposed revisions are to Bulletin 1530. That's our Louisiana's IEP handbook for students with exceptionalities. Also to Bulletin 1573. This is the complaint management procedures. And then lastly is Bulletin 1706. These are the regulations of implementation of the Children with Exceptionalities Act. So I will present this information for your consideration. So based on a 2024 review from OSEP, our dispute resolution policies and procedures, we are proposing revisions to certain policies, and these revisions align with OSEP's recommendations with federal guidelines. So the first item for your review, here on the slide, it is an update to Bulletin 1573. Again, this is that bulletin that outlines complaint management procedures. So the needed updates here that OSEP gave us for this bulletin, they include updating the definition of public agency to also include the state, local education agency, or an LEA, as well as an educational service agency, or an ESA, nonprofits, public charter schools that are not otherwise included as LEAs or ESAs. And then OSEP also reviewed the policies information around ERP. That ERP is an early resolution program. And we'll also go into that on the next slide, as OSEP has indicated that this is a voluntary program based on state policy. So you can see here with this slide, this is OSEP reviewing our Bulletin 1706. This bulletin is our regulations for implementation of Children with Exceptionalities Act, as well as Bulletin 1530, which is Louisiana's IEP handbook for students with exceptionalities. So with these bulletins, OSEP did reference our Louisiana policy, again, around early resolution programs, or ERP, within our policy. OSEP has indicated that this is a Louisiana policy. It is not a federal obligation. So the suggestion with this policy is to remove that mandated ERP process. Now this process, it does remain voluntary, but it will not delay that 60-day timeline process around complaint decisions. And then again, other updates with these policies from OSEP, they include aligning the language around public agency, and then some technical edits, again, thinking about language with that public agency with the LEA. Okay, so with that policy overview, I will now open the floor for any member discussion. So your suggestion is to move the phone numbers from... Okay.
Anyone else have a question?
Yes.
Jessica.
So for the ERP, it's not spelled out for the parents. Will it be explained what the ERP is in the?
Yes. Great question, Dr. White. So the ERP process will be mentioned within the policy and discussed how this is a voluntary decision within the district. And then we also have some internal guidance that we will create just discussing what that ERP is and talking about some district decisions.
Anyone else? Thank you.
Don't think we have any public comments for this agenda item. Okay, well, we will proceed to our next agenda item then. This is also new business. And this agenda item is with our federal fiscal year 2026, our IDA grant application. And I will present this information for your consideration. So as you are likely aware, IDA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, this act supports students with disabilities through multiple funding sources. So with IDA Part B, 619, this is for our early childhood. The student population is students ages 3 to 5. There is not an IDA application required to submit to OSEP for this student population for 619. However, for IDA Part B 611, this grant is for students ages 3 to 21. It is a formula grant, and it does require an application to be submitted to OSEP. So this slide here provides you with an overview of IDA Part B 611 grant funds. You can see the description of flow-through here, as well as set-aside and state admin fund. So with flow-through, this comprises about 87% of that total grant. Set-aside is 11% of the total grant. And then lastly, we have our state admin fund, and that makes up 2% of our total grant award. So we are currently, as an agency, under our IDA grant application review process. We need to submit to OSEP at the end of May, so we wanted to bring it to your attention today. And as we're reviewing the set-aside grant application and the different categories, you can see that each state is required to devote funds for certain categories. So some of those categories include technical assistance, personnel prep. We also have professional development and training. Also with these categories are funds for our high-cost students. So those are students with high needs in our school district. We also have the provision of assessment accommodations and an alternate assessment. We have the utilization of behavioral interventions and supports, as well as appropriate mental health services. And then lastly, you can see here is the use of technology in our classrooms. And so that now brings us to the next slide here. Again, wanted to bring it to your attention that we have our stakeholder input survey. So again, thinking about our IDA application that will be submitted to OSEP at the end of May, wanted to make you aware of this stakeholder input portion on that IDA application. So when our agency does submit our grant application to OSEP for the funding of IDA, we do seek your feedback, of course, from our special education stakeholders. So please share this information with the different groups that you're in. This is also available on our website, but we are seeking information on IDA funding priorities by April 10th. Again, that IDA application will be submitted to OSEP at the end of May, so wanting to ensure that we get all of our stakeholder feedback by mid-April. Okay. So with that overview, yeah, Ashley.
normally we'll get like an idea of what the department is looking at as their priorities with like an estimated cost or looking at last year's. Do y'all have that to provide to us?
It is currently on our website. Yes.
Okay.
So whenever you go here to that stakeholder input survey, there is the link directly to the breakdown with funding. It is very similar, Ashley, to last year's funding priorities.
Okay.
But it definitely gives you an overview of what funding was prioritized last year, what we're considering for the upcoming fiscal year as well. So when you pull that up, it will have draft written on it intentionally just for your view as you're considering it for this stakeholder input.
With the high costs, do y'all have information on if y'all were able to meet the needs, like 100% of the needs of the requested amounts, or is there additional dollars that are needed to fulfill the requests from the districts for that pool of kids?
Great question, Ashley. It's my understanding that we have met the funding needs for high cost.
Okay.
So, yep.
Okay.
Any other questions? Wait.
Great question, especially as you're so passionate with transition support. So I appreciate you asking that. So I have just our draft application that's online, and it kind of has that breakdown of the different categories. So with transition specifically, we have our direct services, we have technical assistance, we have personnel prep, professional development, and training. So some of that dollar amount would be utilized within transitional supports. We also have specific development and implementation of transition programs, including coordination of services with agencies involved in supporting the transition of children with disabilities to post-secondary activities. So there is specific category as well as like state level activity for transition, as well as the activities and descriptions specific to transition. So that is a great question and one that's certainly a priority for our state. You're welcome.
You know the dollar amount?
Yep, the proposed dollar amount right now for transition, Ashley, it is 1.8 million. And again, that is still proposed, but based on estimates and priorities from previous year's fiscal funding.
Any other questions? I think yes.
Good morning. Apologies for my tardiness. It's a madhouse out there. A couple technical questions. The materials that were sent that were available, none of the links are clickable, so I can't access that survey. I'm not sure if anyone else has any problems with that. So if you can give us perhaps a direct link to where we can find the priorities. Ashley posed a great question about where we were last year opposed to where we are headed. That was the first technical question. And of course, the second left my mouth. It's gonna come back.
No, I appreciate you flagging that. The links should all be accessible, but it sounds like they are not. So I'll make sure to email all panel members just with the direct links to this input survey, to our funding that's on the website as well, just so you can see that breakdown.
Perfect. I do remember the next one. Do we so we know how much was utilized last year, requested last year. I see that you all are going to propose what we're going to use or what you plan to use for this upcoming grant. Do we know the student population that we plan to serve for each of these categories?
For each specific category?
Well, it was noted about like transition services, like how much is going toward each of those efforts. I'm just wondering what student population numbers look like in terms of who we're servicing in those priority categories.
We can certainly make that data request. Okay. That's a great flag, Dejan.
That's all.
Any other questions from the committee? If not, this concludes the new business. We move forward with informational reports.
informational report. And our first report is our K through 12 Instructional Materials Review, or IMR rubric, for dyslexia high quality instructional materials, also known as HQIM, our supplemental list. And so we have a member of our literacy team, Miss Wendy Brooks, here to present this information.
Good morning, everyone. As Dr. Wells shared, we would like to provide an update regarding the K-12 Instructional Materials Review, or IMR process, which will help to establish a dyslexia high-quality instructional materials supplemental list. Now, this review process has been initiated by LDOE in response to a specific recommendation from the Louisiana Literacy Advisory Commission, or LLAC, stating that a supplemental list of programs should be developed to support students with dyslexia. This recommendation is grounded in evidence showing that early identification and intervention are critical for students with dyslexia. So before we explore this review process, it is very important for us to acknowledge that dyslexia exists on a spectrum of severity from mild to profound. This means that some students who are identified with dyslexia may in fact be successful in achieving literacy growth with strong Tier 1 supports in the classroom, strong Tier 2 interventions that leverage core HQIM, Tier 3 intensive interventions, or through a layered system of tiered literacy supports. Now, this list that will be developed for these approved dyslexia materials will be intended to support students whose needs may have not yet been met through the established RTI process according to assessment data, or who need a more intensive diagnostic prescriptive approach. In other words, not every student with dyslexia would automatically need an intervention from this prescribed list. Instead, the list would provide simply a potential pathway to ensure that the needs of all students are met in our Louisiana schools. So with that being said, this review process seeks to establish a consistent evidence-based set of criteria for reviewing instructional materials that will serve those students with dyslexia and related reading difficulties. The rubric used in the review process that is being developed will help to ensure greater alignment with Louisiana's literacy vision and the requirements outlined in Bulletin 1903, Louisiana Handbook for Students with Dyslexia. The resulting list of materials will again provide guidance to support school systems with identifying the multisensory structured literacy programs suitable for dyslexia intervention as deemed appropriate through this very rigorous evaluation process. So we'll start by taking a look at grades 3 through 8. Grades 3 through 8 already have an established Tier 3 intensive reading intervention review process in place. That existing review will essentially serve as a gateway for the grade 312 grade band for the dyslexia-specific evaluation. So for grades 3 through 12, the process would begin with that previously established set of criteria from the Foundations of Reading Intensive Intervention State Review. Only materials that first earned that Tier 1 rating would then be able to proceed to the dyslexia-specific review. Any materials rated through that process as Tier 2 or Tier 3 or potentially not reviewed would then not, of course, be eligible to move forward with the dyslexia-specific review process. Now, if Tier 1 is achieved within the grade 312 review, the materials would move to the dyslexia pre-screening requirements. Those requirements include criteria such as confirming that no 3Qing or MSV is present, providing evidence of training and certification pathways for the teachers delivering the intervention, demonstrating a systematic scope and sequence. We are also seeking to add some additional criteria to the dyslexia pre-screening that would just involve access to the materials during that review process, as well as a pricing structure to increase the transparency as our school systems review those materials. Now, if all of that pre-screening requirement has been met, then the 312 products would move on to Phase 3, the dyslexia-specific state review. So we'll pause there in that piece for 312 to take a look at the K-12 process. Now, Louisiana does not currently maintain a separate pre-established list of K-2 intensive literacy interventions because our K-2 educators are currently recommended to leverage their core HQIM materials within the Tier 2, Tier 3 intervention settings with increased intensity, frequency, and duration to meet the literacy needs of our K-2 students. Therefore, the K-2 pathway, as you're seeing here, would serve as the gateway into the dyslexia-specific review. Now, you'll notice that the K-2 pathway involves the pre-screening process, which would require all vendors to submit IMR documentation, demonstrate alignment to the science of reading and Louisiana dyslexia requirements. If the materials do not meet that initial pre-screening requirement criteria, which again aligns with the 312 process as well, they would not be eligible to move on to the dyslexia-specific review. If the materials do meet the pre-screening requirements, they would move into the foundational criteria phase of this process, which again aligns with the 312 criteria, but more specific to the K2 space. And if the materials do meet all of the criteria in that pathway, so K2 does have a couple of layers to establish that it is ready to be reviewed in the dyslexia-specific component, they would then move on to the phase 3 dyslexia-specific state review. So we have processes that we've outlined for K2. We have a pathway outlined for grades 3 through 12, but both of those pathways would then converge here for the final layer of dyslexia review. And this is where we have really strived to establish a rigorous process for the review of these materials. So it is in this third and final phase of this review process where the criteria will hone in on and focus on specialized features deemed essential for strong dyslexia intervention. This would include that diagnostic to prescriptive approach, multisensory instruction as required by Bulletin 1903, the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and tactile components that are routine-based, as well as responsiveness to dyslexia-related learning needs and evidence established through research that the interventions are proven to be effective for students with dyslexia. So if the materials receive a no on any of these criteria, they would be rated Tier 3 and would not proceed. If they do meet the non-negotiable criteria in Section 1 and Section 2, they could then earn a Tier 1 rating. And having said that they have earned the Tier 1 rating, they even have another opportunity to add an additional seal of approval if they can provide additional documentation that they have certifications or accreditations through other associations. So as you can see, we have sought to establish a highly rigorous process for this review to create this list of supplemental materials that could then be used by school systems as a resource, as a pathway for identifying ways to provide support and meet the needs of all of our students. Yes, it is very complex.
Good morning. That was a lot. I just wanted to first commend the department for getting this far. As you guys know, dyslexia is my jam. So we brought this, I remember our committee reviewing this back at the January meeting. Unfortunately, we didn't have a quorum, so it didn't make it to the minutes. But we've been on this journey for a little while, coming to the point where we are ready to establish some criteria for dyslexia intervention. So thank you for that hard work. A couple of questions that you may have touched on, and I missed it, sorry. Timeline. So can we talk a little bit about what the expectation is for feedback, review, department approval, launch, and then when will this get in the hands of districts?
Absolutely. So the Teacher Leader Advisor, or TLA, hiring process just opened on March 16th. The Diverse Learners team is overseeing that process with the support of the literacy team. We are seeking to acquire those applications and review them and solidify our hiring processes by towards the end of April. And then once we have that in place and we're able to secure contracts, we are looking to start training our TLAs towards the end of July, pending all deadlines being met there. And then once we have identified and contracted our TLAs and trained them, they will start the review process, hopefully by the end of August at latest, but our target would be September to start actually reviewing those materials. And all of those, of course, pending those deadlines being met along the way.
Mm-hmm. And so reviewing from the time materials are reviewed to the time that districts will have a list of materials to choose from.
So we are leaning into our IMR specialists for that piece. In some cases, through the 3.8 review, it could take them up to a year. If they get a lot of applications from vendors, it may take some time to make their way through all of those. And Dr. Wells may want to provide input on that as well. But we were thinking within that 26-27 school year would be the review, and then they should be available in fall of 27 is where we're targeted.
So that's what I'm wrapping my head around on that timeline. Mm-hmm. So districts aren't going to look at receiving a list of materials to choose from until toward the end of the 26-27 school year to make decisions for the 27-28 school year for planning purposes. I would just ask y'all to review the alignment and sort of the release of other documents. I know we'll go into how sort of that the parent handbook plays into this, the core assessment. Districts have to have something, like they're going to need some guidance before, like in the interim while this very rigorous process is going through. So I just urge you guys to think through the guidance for the districts, because we know that, if you are backed up against the wall, you just kind of throw your hands up saying, I don't have anything. So if we can give some guidance around that, I'm sure they would appreciate something in the interim.
Absolutely.
My next question is funding. This will follow the same funding source that all districts can have access to when choosing HQIM, high quality instructional materials, for their districts, or will this be a separate funding need for this?
Yeah, so good question. I think it might require braiding of some funds. So it's certainly a conversation that literacy and diverse learners are continuing to have. And when we think about like our IDA application that we spoke around earlier, additional policies and funding can occur around dyslexia, right? So certainly it's something for us to think about from an IDA standpoint, but we're continuing to discuss with literacy to really figure out what this looks like for our districts. Because you're exactly right. We're releasing policy. We've got our core assessment that we'll talk about in a little while. And so there's a lot of discussion around dyslexia. So we want to make sure our districts are supported. So an internal, guidance review and release for those districts. But of course, next step is funding. So yes, it's on our priority list for sure.
We just don't want them to get too overwhelmed where they sort of shut down from the overload.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Public comment for Miss Laura Cassidy.
Green, is it working? Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you for letting me speak. Thank you for all what you do here. I'm very appreciative. I want to talk about some things concerning this curriculum. I'm a mom of a grown dyslexic child, and I'm an educator of sorts, not a traditional educator, but I've been involved in teaching, working with parents and students of dyslexics for over 15 years. And that's been through Louisiana Key Academy, which is the largest network of schools for kids with dyslexia. And it's through the Dyslexia Resource Center, which trains teachers and also gives virtual and in-person dyslexia therapy. We work with school districts here, as you mentioned, which is so important, in Louisiana, in Texas, New Jersey, Colorado, and around the United States. We also get the word out through podcasts, webinars, talks, and some of the papers that I've brought, published papers. My concern is what was alluded to is the achievement gap, the academic achievement gap. It is present in the first grade between the dyslexic and the non-dyslexic child. It does not go away. And so that's why we have screening for dyslexia at the end of kindergarten. And the gold standard, the science advocates intensive immersive dyslexia therapy for children with dyslexia. And the reason it does is because we have studies, and of course you've read studies that show they can predict incarceration rates based on third grade reading. And so if you think about it, if the achievement gap is in the first grade, that's when we want to immerse them in the evidence-based curriculum. That's what we do at the school, and we have published data. Our new paper is from the Journal of Pediatric Neuropsychology. So I'm really thankful for what all you do. I would ask that we would look at beta testing, at pilot studies. We have not been a part of this process, but we know that the districts need help. We're working with multiple districts now. And so, again, I thank you for what you do. And if you're interested in any of these papers, which can give you a deeper dive into to dyslexia, I can leave a few. And I think we have a couple other people that want to talk. Thank you.
Love.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Andromeda Love, and I'm the Chief Academic Officer at Louisiana Key Academy. We are a system of charter schools here in the state for kids with dyslexia. And I wanted to make a comment on the evaluation tool. So just overall, we all know the urgency of the reading issues that we're facing in our state and also in our nation. So we know that in 2024, NAEP data shows that we have 40% of our fourth graders still performing below basic. So that means that nearly half of our students are not demonstrating those reading skills that they need to be successful. This really points to the importance of our work and the work that you guys are doing. We know that when kids with dyslexia are not properly identified and given the support that they need, that they often don't receive that evidence-based instruction that they require, and they continue to struggle academically. Over time, they start to believe that they're not right for school or that they're stupid, and without that support, they can disengage from school, and a lot of them ultimately drop out. As Dr. Cassidy mentioned as I was walking in, there are some long-term consequences to this. We know that kids with dyslexia have a higher likelihood of dropping out of school. There's an increased risk of incarceration, addiction, self-harm, and higher unemployment for those students. So these outcomes really make it clear that this is something that is an issue, and we don't have the freedom to get this wrong. So some key concerns with the current guidance, the evaluation tool. One thing is the positioning of intervention. So the tool talks about how service should complement but not replace Tier 1 and Tier 2 instruction. And it should reinforce the instructional approaches used in that high quality core instruction. The reality is that students with dyslexia are often pulled out for intervention, and then they're returned into a core classroom where they're asked to participate in instruction that does not meet their needs. So this creates a fundamental issue where they're expected to continue engaging in those instructional approaches in the core classroom, although they don't meet their needs. So we know that students with dyslexia do need explicit systematic diagnostic to prescriptive instruction that directly addresses their deficits. What they don't need is more practice with those inefficient methods that aren't working for them. Another thing, just to speak very quickly, is the lack of specificity. So it talks about group size, time, and frequency. There's nothing that's universally required, that it should be based off of the student's need. And while that's technically true, if our goal is really to give districts usable information and guidance that they can use, we really have to make sure that we're relying on the science of dyslexia and also tying that back to what students actually need in the classroom.
Thank you. Call our meeting back to order. A quorum has been met. So again, thank you everyone for your dedication to being here. Thank you so much. So our meeting has officially been called to order with a quorum at 9:42. And then we will also take roll again.
Melissa Baham. Rebecca Beard. Miss Morgan. Miss Calloway. Miss Sandy Halloway. Erin Downing. Dr. Sally Rose Gaglione. Rebecca Huff. Brandy Hooling. Dejanay Clark Jackson.
Here.
Sherilyn Jurish. Ashley McReynolds. Angela Miles. Dr. Donna Reno. Julia Tanner. Michael Thompson. Rhonda Washington. Dr. Jessica White. Alveda Willis. Roxy. Dr. Paul Mooney. And Christy Gonzalez. Thank you. Christine Hargrave. Here.
Yes, I think the only other item we need to address with a quorum is just the approval of our November minutes. So can we get a motion for approval of those minutes?
I move to approve.
Dejanay. And do we have a second? All right, we are back on track now. Thanks again, everyone.
So at this time, we would like to provide an update regarding the status of the development of the Louisiana Dyslexia Family Handbook. The Louisiana Literacy Advisory Commission, or LLAC, has created another goal for us that every school community will expand opportunities for parents and families to be engaged in their children's literacy development. As a critical action step for achieving this goal, LLAC recommended that LDOE must create a dyslexia parent handbook to support the families of children with dyslexia. In response to this call to action, we have established a dyslexia work group consisting of parents, teachers, school leaders, certified academic language therapists and practitioners, educational diagnosticians, as well as other stakeholders. This group provided invaluable recommendations and feedback throughout the development process of the handbook, and the work group concluded with our final work meeting on January 13th. At this time in your folder, we would like to share with you the table of contents, as well as the first few pages of content from the handbook, just to give you an idea of what the content may look like. Please note that the final product will be more parent-friendly and presented with more visual aids and supports. We are currently working with our communications team on the graphic design aspects, and our goal is to launch the resource at Teacher Leader Summit. Sessions will also be provided at Teacher Leader Summit to support systems and school leaders with exploring and implementing this resource with their families. So with that brief update, I'll hand it back to you for public or for Gibson.
Morning. My name is Megan Gibson, and I am the Reading Content Specialist at Louisiana Key Academy. I'm also a certified academic language therapist and someone who grew up with undiagnosed dyslexia. I want to begin with a moment I will never forget. I sat beside a student in a small group during her first year at a dyslexia school. She stared at the page, and then she began to cry. When I asked what was wrong, she said, "I don't want to let you down." That moment wasn't about reading. It was about years of frustration, failure, and fear. But here's what changed for her. She was finally taught by a trained specialist, someone who understood the science of reading, dyslexia, and how to deliver instruction in a way that works. Every day for 90 minutes in a small group of 6 to 8 students, I provided explicit, systematic, cumulative, multisensory, and diagnostic instruction. We addressed phonological awareness, found symbol correspondence, syllable type, morphology, and fluency, while also supporting her underlying barriers like working memory, language, and attention. And she grew, not just in skill, but in confidence. This is what effective instruction looks like. But this is not what most dyslexic students receive. Too often, students are expected to sit through whole group core instruction that does not meet their needs and then be pulled out for more instruction. This core plus more model increases time, but not effectiveness. Time alone is not the solution, instruction is. In regards to best practice, the National Reading Panel identified several key elements critical for literacy development, particularly for students with dyslexia: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. The Louisiana Key Academy academic plan addresses all essential elements: phonemic awareness and decoding skills, phonics, are developed through systematic and explicit instruction. In regards to sufficient duration and frequency of instruction, our school provides 90 minutes of reading instruction daily. This dedicated block is students' core instruction, not a pullout, ensuring they have consistent, protected time to build the reading skills in a way that works for them. In regards to small targeted groups, our school has small groups of 6 to 8 students, enabling teachers to target specific skills, adjust pacing based on student need, and provide frequent real-time feedback, an essential component for developing literacy skills in students with dyslexia. Most importantly, we have highly trained teachers. At our school, our teachers are certified academic language therapists and practitioners. They complete a rigorous 2-year training program accredited by MSLEC and grounded in the science of reading. This level of expertise matters because without it, we are asking students to work harder in systems that were not.
To the speakers, do y'all have, I couldn't tell if y'all had concerns with what was being presented by the department. If so, could you explain them related to the instruction um, flow charts and like the tier one, tier two, tier three? I couldn't really figure out if y'all had concerns with it, and if so, like you could expand on those.
Sure. And that was my mistake because I wrote a lot and then didn't get it all in. But our concerns, we were speaking specifically about the evaluation tool. So I know we're looking at dyslexia evaluations for the instructional materials. So in that guidance, it talks about how we want what's being done in those pullouts or in those quality materials that we're identifying as being really great in tier one for kids with dyslexia. We want those tools to complement but not replace what's being done in tier one or tier two instruction. So the issue with that becomes that for kids with dyslexia, it's not just that they need more time with the same curriculum or same instruction, they need instruction that is different. So one of the issues with having a child with dyslexia in the core in the core classroom is they're interacting with that curriculum, that material, and then they're being pulled out to interact with something that is supposed to complement what is happening in the classroom. But they don't need more time with what's being done in the classroom. They need something that is specifically different. So that was one of the concerns. And then the other piece was just making sure that we're being really specific, because I know that this work that you guys are doing comes out of need within the district. They're asking for, now that we're identifying kids with dyslexia, what do we do with them? But my concern here is that there's really a lack of specificity as to what that should look like. And I definitely understand part of that is because you guys know that districts have different abilities and all those different things. But the worry with that becomes that if we're not being specific, then it doesn't serve the purpose that we're looking for. If we're saying that there's no gold standard as far as group size, duration, and frequency, we're not really giving them anything, any actionable direction that they can actually use. So I do think just being more specific, tied to what we know about dyslexia, is going to be helpful to districts moving forward. So our thing with this would really be to take some time to look at it more deeply. We would love to be involved in that work so that we can make sure that when it does go out, it is something that's really useful for districts and something that they can take and make actionable decisions with.
Could I also just ask clarification from the steps of the process being used or utilized to identify what curriculums and resources to use to help support students with dyslexia? Is there something in, excuse me, in that process? I'm sure within those curriculums or in those support materials, it will have certain directions about, group size and their recommendations on the steps of the process and how long, duration, frequency. Am I mistaken, or is that something that usually is clearly spelled out in these programs? No, that is correct. Even through the TLA review process, the TLAs will have a guidance document that takes each of the individual criteria from the rubric and then expands upon that criteria and provides additional information around, for example, group size. We're looking for that one-to-one individual, potentially one-to-two. It obviously depends on the design of the curricula, but it gives additional information for each criteria so that as a TLA is reviewing the materials, they can then make a more precise decision around whether or not it meets that indicator. Thank you.
I have a comment addition to that. I appreciate how the public comments are helping underscore the need for this tool. Districts have already used tools like this for intervention selection, so it is specific in terms of allowing choice to be made around dyslexia, direct intervention materials, which right now we know our districts have no access to or guidance or understanding around. And so this tool helps that, and it highlights how it does complement that tier one in a way that it's not more of the same. And so for clarity, if the department can answer, is this tool meant to be an extension of the tier one curriculum where it's curriculum-based, curriculum-specific intervention, or is it deemed to be specific interventions aligned to dyslexia, not necessarily aligned to the curriculum?
Yes, it's more designed to meet the needs where the student is at based on their individual deficits or areas of strength and areas of need for growth. Students, obviously depending on their pathway, if they're in that 5-step referral process where they're being identified, potentially you're early on in that process, you're gathering the initial data, you're screening them, you're providing immediate intervention. Even if you don't know exactly what the diagnosis is just yet, we're trying to get them intervention quickly, but we move them through that 5-step referral process, which of course coincides with the 1508 pupil appraisal piece, because as soon as a disability is suspected, they would then want to move to that full evaluation step with the SBLC. But the goal is for the materials from this list to give them an option once that child is identified as having dyslexia. They could still receive strong core instruction through inclusion minutes, through pull out, through different variations of what that might look like for that student. But then these materials would then add another layer to that to give them that direct and explicit, systematic, diagnostic, prescriptive, checking all of those boxes that we're looking for in the indicators through this review process.
You said the right thing about being diagnostic and prescriptive. I think one thing that I can lean into is that we have to have highly trained
Yes.
educators. So obviously that needs to be the next step in terms of what needs to be addressed at the school level, because while this materials review and the actual materials, hopefully that will be selected, will have embedded diagnostic and prescriptive guidance. of course, we need to have staff that can lean into that and understand how to interpret that. And we know that dyslexia is not a one size fits all. Every student that has a diagnosis or identification of dyslexia won't need the same thing. So I appreciate that flexibility in that, but some specific guidance around what those students needs, and hopefully that will come through their evaluation. That's what an evaluation is for, is to give guidance on what that specific student needs. So we just need to look at what that handoff looks like to whatever team. It can be an IEP team or not, because again, every student with dyslexia won't have to have that level of rigor. And so I appreciate that flexibility, but we will need to have, those stepping stones in terms of where we know where we need to be ultimately, but what steps do we need to take to get there, and what's practical for implementation and application at the district level, regardless of their access to resources. So thank you.
Sorry, one more. Okay. What qualifies a teacher to be highly qualified as a dyslexia instructor or dyslexia expert? How do we?
Great question. No, you.
Okay. It depends on their pathway. There are programs that offer training as a certified academic language therapist, certified academic language practitioner. There are curricular materials that provide their own pathways, and they may go through a 2-year training program with a specified number of hours that they have to practice and implement the intervention within those curricular materials. Then they receive certification through that pathway. So it just is determined by which pathway they're going and which vendor they're using.
Is there, I know in the past there have been, and I could be wrong on this, but incentives for teachers to go back and get additional certifications. Is there an option for the department to offer this to districts to incentivize them to go back and get these additional certifications? I know we had conversations around this regarding the shortage of certified special education teachers. There's obviously a shortage of certified, or I don't know if that's the correct term, but for these particular students. Is that something that we could potentially look at, is to incentivize these additional add-on certifications because there's obviously a need, and what's the path, I guess, to ensure that each kid can have access to a highly, qualified teacher?
That's a great question, Ashley, and it's something that similar to what Dejanay referenced earlier around funding, because we want to make sure that all of our districts feel equipped to support these students. And so it is a discussion that we're having with literacy around some next steps. Whenever we do push out this, the IMR process, what does that look like to support our educators? So we're having those conversations with this school now. And again, the timing I think is really relevant and appropriate when we think about our IDA priorities with that application.
So that could be used to help support districts fund these certifications?
And we do have, thinking about that IDA application, we do have a category already around professional development for districts, personnel prep, things like that. But it's certainly something that we can look to determine if we need to increase that dollar amount, and if so, proposing that, and going forward with those next steps. But yes, it's a great flag to
I
make
would
sure
like
that
to
our
propose it for both certified SPED and this population. If we can use those dollars creatively that way, I think that would be really nice.
Thank you.
Have a quorum, I guess I can make a motion. I know we're not on the IDEA grant thing, we've already sort of covered that, so we might have to go back. So I'll just wait. I think I'm out of order.
If I can, I love that. If I can contribute to the response to that and give some more context around where we are as a state. I am the current vice president of the Alta, Louisiana chapter, which is our Academic Language Therapists Association that certifies those professionals. So you're highly trained, highly qualified, like say certified academic language therapist, that's the top. And so there are other pathways to be a specialist or an interventionist and that kind of thing, but you really want a certified academic language therapist. And so we've come a long way. We have the ability, and I think thanks to Dr. Cassidy's work around ensuring that we have an ancillary certification available as an add-on for teachers in the state. That is an option. But what we're hearing in the field is that, to your point, there's no incentive, not just financial incentive, but the job market. So we have approximately 106 certified therapists or practitioners or whatever level that they are part of that association. There are only approximately 35 with that ancillary certification in the state. And of those, probably only 2 to 3 work within schools. And so you would ask why? If we have 100 and something in the state, well, most of them are private practice, and then the rest of them don't have anywhere to go. So there are no positions that are available within the school district that will allow them to utilize that highly trained, highly qualified, specialized training within their school district because they don't hire dyslexia therapists. There are no positions for them to walk into. So that is a sort of a part of our next plight. And so again, when we look at training across the state for that highest level of specialty, the answer is why. The question rather is why. Where are they going to go? Yeah, we know the why it's needed, but then where do they land? So we could just keep that in mind when they have those internal conversations so that we can address those needs at that level. Thank you.
Go ahead. You've been waiting. You're welcome.
Anything up with dyslexia?
Thank you for those questions, Ms. Morgan, and your feedback. And we absolutely recognize, especially through the process of creating the IMR review and the Dyslexia Family Handbook, we recognize an ongoing need to provide additional guidance to our school systems that's feasible, that's practical, that helps them enact these recommendations in real time. So as a response to that, we're currently looking at revising the Guide to Dyslexia that was published in 2024. We are trying to align it with the structure of the family handbook as it currently stands, just to build that additional coherence. But we will expand the guidance within each of those sections specifically towards the LEAs and implementation of strong dyslexia practice. That coincides also with creation of learning modules that will be free to systems on the Louisiana Professional Learning Platform. Those are currently in development, and we hope to have those out within the next few months. My personal goal is to have that first module or two ready by the start of the school year, but it would provide a foundational basis for our classroom teachers just to know what dyslexia is, what are some of those common indicators that they may recognize through academic performance, through just interacting with their students, through those observations they have. And then moving from there, we will continue to provide professional learning packages through support with school systems, through Teacher Leader Summit, as well as exploring other options to provide professional learning to the dyslexia leaders within our school systems all the way into the classroom for our teachers. Yes.
I was just gonna kind of make a comment, I guess, on the
special education director side of things, while we ask, are there incentives, to get these dyslexia therapists or these highly qualified individuals to come and provide these? If we look at our rural districts, that is something that we struggle with, even to have a certified special ed teacher. And so last year we utilized some of our IDEA funds to provide an incentive, and I actually had 2 teachers leave at the end of the year. So I can't, from experience, I can't say that that's the answer. I don't know what the answer is, but I just kind of wanted to give that input. We're competing with districts that have more revenue, so their teachers have a higher pay scale than our teachers. So typically that's where our certified teachers go. So if we have a certified dyslexia therapist and a position opens, that's the reality, is that's where they're going to go. And then I know that we're discussing the implementation of it. And so in our district, because my child is a product of it, of early intervention. So that's something that we've always done, is the multisensory, it hits those check marks. And I think that whether they're diagnosed dyslexia or not, that the district should provide it for them if they need it. And so I just want to make sure I think we're all in agreement on that, but just to put that out there is, my child was never diagnosed dyslexia, but she received the early literacy intervention, and now she's reading on grade level. She's in high school, so she's a product of that. So if we implement it with the fidelity, and so I want to say that even though we've not had districts, haven't really had the guidance on what materials to select, there are districts that have been selecting the materials that meet the checklist. So.
I just had a comment. Is it going to be, I guess, in the guidance for districts, once the programs have been chosen, that they be delivered or supported, or students are supported by the certified dyslexia specialist, or will it be a certified teacher, or will there be any kind of guidance? Yes, so that does coincide with the pre-screening requirements, where we ask for the vendor to provide details around certification or the training pathways, so that whoever is delivering the intervention would have received that training. And then the guidance on the school system side would be included within the guide for dyslexia as well.
Okay. Wendy, thank you for both of those presentations. We certainly appreciate it. And kudos to our panel here and our public comments as well. I know we're all passionate about supporting our diverse learners, so we certainly appreciate the dialogue that you brought today. We will move on to our next informational report now. This is a report around that Dyslexia Core Assessment Program, and I'll present that information to you. So simply keeping with our current theme around dyslexia, we wanted to highlight this Dyslexia Core Assessment Program. As you are currently aware, this is currently underway. It is part of our 2024 regular legislation session from Act 517. As you probably remember, this act, it did indicate that if a student is at risk for dyslexia, according to a school-based dyslexia screener, then that student's parent or his or her legal guardian does have the opportunity to request a dyslexia core assessment. So that dyslexia core assessment will be given either by the local education agency or a vendor or professional that's been approved by LDOE to administer this dyslexia core assessment. And of course, keeping in mind that the process to become a vendor, that individual must submit our RFA, our request for application, and that process is linked here on the slide as well as on LDOE's website. But again, as we are talking about dyslexia during this SEAP meeting, as we are in March for the school year and thinking about maybe the screenings that are taking place or will soon take place in our schools, we wanted to bring you this information as a reminder to that dyslexia core assessment program. And then just sharing one more slide around that program. Again, the program is open. That reimbursement portal and that portal for our vendors is also open. So everything is available now on our website, and you can see, and I think, again, the links are not working in that slide deck, so I'll send them out directly to you all. But as you're communicating in your school districts, as you're talking with families, and maybe those families are interested in additional support around dyslexia, we wanted to share this dyslexia core assessment program with you. Okay, so that was my brief informational report. Do we have any member discussion?
Do we have an update on how many vendors have been approved? Is there like access to an approved vendor in every district? So like a student needs one, they can easily access one like nearby, or they happen to travel?
So our vendor list, it shows if that vendor is in person, virtual, or both.
Okay.
So if there's not necessarily a vendor maybe in some of our rural areas, there are some virtual options as well.
Okay.
Yes, Dr. Wells, I have a question. What's the current budget allocation for this program, and approximately how many students is it estimated to serve?
So currently from legislation, we have $1 million. $1 million will go strictly to the reimbursement process. And then there is just an approximation around students, because right now we're estimating that whenever we think about that kindergarten Shaywitz dyslexia screener that's occurring now and into the end of the year. And then we also have some other items thinking about third grade with maybe good cause exemption with a diagnosis of dyslexia. So we don't have exact numbers because this is our first year, but we have some estimates around what that might look like. But I can get you a closer number as the year progresses and we continue to receive updates from our vendor that manages this system for us.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there a deadline to apply for the RFA?
Currently, no, Rebecca. So if your school district might be interested, or again, any vendor that might be interested in applying, there currently is not a deadline. As we continue to support this program and think about funding, we might eventually cut that RFA process off. But right now, we do not have a close date, and it is certainly still open and available.
While we're waiting for public comment, Lauren, just for clarity, that 1 million also is used for other line items other than the core assessment, or this is 1 million strictly for the core assessment?
That's a great question. And so we wanted to make sure that this was going strictly to that core assessment. So IDA has absorbed other costs, thinking about any procurement fees, thinking about administrative fees, but the 1 million is strictly to support our core assessment reimbursement process.
So just doing quick math, because I'm not a mathematician, just literacy, that would support approximately 2,000
I had the numbers at one point, and I did not print it out. But yes,
yeah.
So giving up to $500 per assessment, that sounds about right.
Okay.
But any
Just
numeracy
for
folks that want to check our
just
math?
just for context around just looking at sort of our population and what we're looking at in terms of assessment. So it's not very much, and it won't go very far, but I think it will certainly hopefully make an impact wherever it lands.
Correct. Yeah. Especially thinking about parent choice and parent opportunity of what that might look like to support their students. So.
Is there any discussion about working with the legislature to maybe get this $1 million? Is this a recurring $1 million, or was this just a one-time allocation, like in the budget, like a line item for this particular assessment, or are we going to get this $1 million?
It's not reoccurring as of now. Now, thinking about we are in session, things can change, as we know, pretty suddenly. But right now, it was a one-time funding opportunity specific to this program. But I'm not sure what legislative items might come back up.
Okay, thanks.
up, if you could please tell us who you represent and then what agenda item that you would like to speak on.
Yes, ma'am. Hi, I'm Andromeda Love, representing Louisiana Key Academy and speaking on agenda item 4C. Okay, so one thing with the what we're speaking about, the Dyslexia Core Assessment Program, wonderful program, very excited to see that in place for students and families. One thing that I did want to point out is just something to consider and think about. So Louisiana Key Academy, we do provide free screening and evaluation for students, whether they have a diagnosis already from somewhere else or not. So that really allows parents to get really easy access to dyslexia screening and evaluation in a way that's not cost prohibitive. One thing that I did want to point out is something to just consider is I do note that the act does say that the students have to be flagged as at risk for dyslexia. And I do definitely understand that the purpose of that is because we have a certain amount of funds. We want to make sure that the kids that where we are reimbursing vendors for this work, that it is for the kids who would most need it. My concern with that would be that when we're looking at that, we're relying on that kindergarten screener where we know that we have kids in other grade levels who may not have received that screener. I know that parents do have the right, of course, to have that conversation with the school, request evaluation, screenings, and those things. But what we hear from working in 10 years in evaluation and our admissions process is that parents unfortunately have a really difficult time. Even though we have the laws in place, we have the rules in place, we hear from a ton of parents that I've been having this conversation and it's not getting anywhere. So I do think that that could be a potential barrier. So as a vendor, our Dyslexia Resource Center, we're doing all of our evaluations and screenings for free, regardless of if we get the reimbursement or not. But just being able to receive that reimbursement allows us to continue to do the work that we're doing. So when we're asking parents to have that conversation with the school, they have to be flagged at risk regardless of grade level. And then the parent we have to in some way get that information from the parent, which of course is another barrier, that connection piece. So I don't know the answer for that, but I do know that just requiring the school to have flagged the student as at risk for dyslexia is a barrier in the program as far as receiving the reimbursement for the vendors who are doing this work.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we have their acting executive director, Jana Broussard, here to present this information to you.
Good morning. Thank you. Good morning. As stated, my name is Jana Broussard. I'm the acting director for the Louisiana Commission for the Deaf. It's been a little while since I've been here with you guys, so I see some familiar faces and some new faces. The last time I was here to provide an update I looked back in January of 2024, so it's been a minute. What you see before you is some information regarding sign language interpreters that are working in the school systems in Louisiana. Act 128 of the 2022 regular legislative session revised the law of the Commission for the Deaf, strengthening some language around what the commission does with regards for sign language interpreters. And that included a mandate that we were to create a registry of certified interpreters in the state and define what those certification requirements are. Historically, educational interpreters working in K through 12 public settings were credentialed by the Louisiana Department of Education. So this particular law actually changed that. The certification requirements are now under the Commission for the Deaf. As you can see, this was back in 2022. So we have spent the last 4 years working very closely with the Department of Ed, very closely with our stakeholders, with educational interpreters, with the deaf community, and other national resources to help define what those new credential requirements needed to be and what that registration process needed to be. Please note that this particular mandate does cover anyone working in the school system, regardless of title, that would be providing communication access in the form of interpretation, meaning between two individuals for students who are deaf and hard of hearing and use sign language to communicate. Which one? Okay, just want to make sure. Okay, thank you. So we are working on rulemaking right now. Just as you have a bulletin for the department, we're within the Department of Health, sorry. We do rulemaking through the administrative code. The current administrative code would be listed under Title 46, as you can see on the slide in front of you, under Professional and Occupational Standards Sign Language Interpreters. This includes all sign language interpreters, not just those working in education. It includes those working in our community settings, in our hospitals, and in our court systems. But each individual setting does have different requirements for interpreters to obtain. Within this administrative code, these are the sections that have been provided. We included professional and provisional qualification registration. Here we go, sorry about that. Just since this, from February of this past year, on February 27th in 2025, we did send a memo to all local educational agencies letting them know what the standards are and when they would be going into effect. On May 22nd, we submitted our formal notice of intent to publish the standards to let it go through the legal process. On June 18th, we released a notice of public hearing from the Department of Health during the rulemaking process. On August 18th, the Department of Health released a response to that public hearing, just letting the public know that we were continuing to move forward with the standards as they were written. As of right now, it is delayed. This particular rule, we voluntarily sent through the Occupational Licensing Review Program with the Department of Justice because it is a brand new set of standards. So for education, they had some standards previously and they've been revised. But for all of the other interpreters, there really were no standards in the state up until now. So we submitted this entire process or this entire rule to that occupational review program. And what they're looking at is just to ensure that all of the standards are in compliance with state occupational law. They are not too restrictive, those types of things. So this is really a good step that we've taken to just ensure that that the rules are not going to, I guess, overly restrict any of our workers. And it's just taking a while, as anything in state government does. So as of right now, we do anticipate, actually, as of just since March 9th, that's changed. It looks like the publishing date for these standards is now going to be in May 20th. So they publish standards on the 20th of every month. So each time something gets delayed, it gets pushed back another month, right? Right now, once the Occupational Licensing Review Program provides their final documentation, the report would then go to the second oversight committee of the legislature, and then that would make it official. And so right now we're looking at May. Originally, the compliance date was written as July 1st, 2026, because we submitted this in May of last year. We did not anticipate it would take an entire year for the standards to go into effect. I do actually have a meeting tomorrow to discuss this further, which I will contact Dr. Wells about and provide an update to see what we can do about that July 1, 2026 date. Because really at this time, it just doesn't seem appropriate since the timing is so short. So I can provide an update via email, via Dr. Wells very soon, as a matter of fact, of when that compliance date would be. But I am happy to take any questions you may have. Hi, yes.
Hi. I don't know who these questions are specifically for, but my bachelor's degree is in American Sign Language Interpretation from RIT, and I ended up moving back to Louisiana because I observed during college an educational interpreter here operate so unprofessionally that I made it my life's decision to come and help change it. So my mind goes to a lot of the guidance that we create as our panel, and I feel like whether it's at the same time as this becomes effective or after it becomes effective, I feel like we could create some even further guidance for our educational interpreters. Specifically determining how we determine what students will benefit from an educational interpreter, because a lot of parents go into these situations completely oblivious because they're not deaf and their child is deaf. And then I see that there's annual maintenance requirements for provisional registrants, but as teachers, we get evaluated no matter what, at least twice a year. So I feel like that would be necessary for our educational interpreters as well. And then steps outlined for when districts say that they can't find anyone. I ended up applying as an educational interpreter, and that's how I ended up becoming a teacher, because a principal looked at me and said, "We can't pay you enough for your degree." And so just curious how we're going to approach that issue, as it remains in a lot of districts, that the salary is really less than what educational interpreters who are qualified and are going to meet these standards should be receiving. So just a couple thoughts. Really excited to see this, though.
One, this is obviously right up your alley, so it's great to hear about your background and the expertise that you can bring to this area of support for us. I've actually received an email, I think it was this week, from our Commission for the Deaf talking about guidance and just a collaborative process with our department and the Louisiana Commission for the Deaf. So exactly what you're saying is aligning with the need that we're also hearing and seeing from the field. So we appreciate that. I'm not sure what, I think it will vary, of course, district by district when we think about salaries, when we think about educational interpreters, but it's certainly something for us to continue to have communication and dialogue around here at the department. So we appreciate you bringing that up.
I'd like to respond, if I may, too, if I can just add a little piece to that. The commission, my background is actually an educational interpreter as well. I spent 14 years in Lafayette Parish, so my heart is definitely in this work. Just recently, the Commission for the Deaf approved at their January board meeting a new set of strategic priorities for the next 3 years, and part of it is deaf education. And so we will definitely be in touch with more to see with the commission as a whole, which of course incorporates deaf educators, paras, everyone, right? The credentialing process, I was hearing you guys talk about that with the dyslexia certification groups, and how do you incentivize people to stay? And pay is such a huge issue with educational interpreters across the state. And so wanting to be able to just address all of that collaboratively is going to be our focus as soon as this is done. And I look forward to talking to you more.
I have a quick question of curiosity. Approximately how many educational interpreters do we have across the state that this may or may not impact?
Just pulled it up. Let's see. If I didn't have so many things open, right? Our most recent data showed 60 interpreters listed, credentialed through the Department of Education, and 53 employed.
How many deaf students do we have?
So again, so this data was actually 2023, so I'm going to have to get you some more updated. Let's see. So if the data that I received, so there's this, I forgot what you guys call it for those that are in education, but they don't give us the specific numbers for some of them that are less than 10 districts. Okay, you follow me. So what I do have is 1,032. With some of those districts just saying less than 10, less than 10, less than 10. I think our district with the highest is Aunt Tammany, Lafayette, St. Tammany, Jefferson. Jefferson has over 100 students there. This one was from 2023, so I'm not quite sure.
My next question would be, so a lot of districts turn to contract companies to provide these services. Will these things, criteria and standards, have to be implemented and applied,
Yes.
by contract companies?
Yes. Yes, these apply to everyone. Yeah. So contractors, subs, anybody, they're still going to have to, because what the certification is their professional certification, right? And so then DOE would then turn around and then provide them an additional certification, I guess, or whatever you would call it, to allow them to work as an employee in the school system, but it would still cover our contractors as well.
I have a question and comment. So my daughter is deaf, hard of hearing, and she is bilaterally cochlear implanted. And so we kind of went through that whenever we're in a rural district, as I've already said. And we contracted for a while for her to have ASL in the classroom, and then eventually chose not to go that route. And here we are, 14, no, excuse me, she just turned 15. She's requesting to learn ASL. And so we contract with Allied Instructional Services because we had someone in person and she retired in December for another student. And so my question is, I just for clarification, so they'll have to go through you all and go through LDOE, or if they are on the registry, they automatically, because if you look at, so the one that was working for us, she was on the registry. She had moved from Florida. And so she met the requirements and she was on the registry, but then she didn't meet the qualifications under LDOE certification. So then we couldn't pay her as a teacher. So that's kind of where I'm confused is, are we only going to go off of what they require, or do we have to look at both of them?
So, and Lauren, I know you're still new, so some of this was being discussed back when Meredith Jordan was still here, but the way that I understand it is that's similar to how DOE looks at nurses. So if you are credentialed, if you're a certified nurse or registered nurse, then they just recognize that registration.
Okay, so that would be, so
we're credentialed here, and then DOE just says, well, if you're valid with Commission for the Deaf, then they recognize that.
okay.
I actually met with our certification team, I guess last month now when I think about it, and exactly what she just described. So it would be similar to our related service personnel, thinking about the licensure requirements that they have. So there wouldn't be like a double layer like you just described. It would be that through LCD that would control the certification and criterion for those interpreters. What is the, I guess, average cost for this service, like as a educational interpreter?
I can tell you what we pay an hour. Well, I think it's around $60 to $70 an hour is what we're paying.
And for the entire school day?
Yes.
Okay, so are y'all utilizing high cost?
We will.
For
This is a unique case to our district because we're one of the districts that's the less than 10.
Okay.
But that will be something that and then she's also providing, so we have some teachers that are interested in learning ASL, and this is just for other districts to consider. But she provides ASL classes outside of the school setting for our teachers and staff to learn ASL at this particular school. So, and then that's a different rate, of course. But yeah, you are paying them about what you're paying a physical therapist contract. So
Yeah, and as a contractor, those rates are about correct. There are certainly districts that employ interpreters, that then those salaries vary across the state. And they're quite low right now, unfortunately, which is why they end up going the contract route. Yeah.
So most districts, I'm assuming, are doing what you're doing and not employing.
Some of our larger districts employ, so like I think Jefferson Parish would definitely be one of them. Lafayette Parish, they do have quite a few, TOs listed. But again, the pay is pretty low, and so a lot of the interpreters who are highly qualified just won't accept those positions, and so they'll come in as a contractor.
And we contract through a company, so through a vendor. And ours is actually virtual right now because we, again, being rural, we can't find anybody. So we make it work. But I know a lot of the districts around us, they have to end up going the virtual route.
District I worked at, they employed and they were paid for
Right, which is part of why this needs to happen too, so that that appropriate professional recognition from that credential can then help, balance out some of the pay. But then the districts have to, have to look at that.
Well, that's why, like earlier, I don't know if you were here, I was talking about like the high cost funds and asking, where were we versus the requests versus how much money, and do we need to look at for next year potentially with this rolling out? We might see an increase in requests for this particular service. I don't know. Normally, it's around I'm trying to think. Is it still around like $4 million in high costs? Okay.
If I can add, and I hope this isn't just completely like off topic, and if so, you can tell me, but most of the districts, and I have the data not right here in front of me, but I can share it. Most of the districts will reimburse interpreters for their testing. But a lot of interpreters don't know that, and so we do try to share that. That we did a survey last year of how many of the districts would reimburse interpreters for any additional credentialing that they may need, and some of them do tuition reimbursement. So we really try to encourage that. But unfortunately, just a lot of people aren't aware that's part of the line item, I guess, within some of those districts.
And actually, it's 4.4 for the high.
It's been around that amount for as long as I've been coming to SEAP meetings, to be honest. Like, I don't think it's really budged much in a while. That's why I was asking, like, do we have data around what was requested, are they being funded at 100%, or are they getting, like, a portion of? So if we could get that data before, I know the survey closes in April. When do we meet again? June?
Until June, yep.
And y'all are submitting in June, correct?
We submit our IDA application. It's due May 20th.
Okay, so we won't meet again prior to seeing the proposed IDEA budget. Okay. Okay, thanks.
And I wonder too if there's opportunity, because they're under the professional development and accommodations section, that's the highest allocation of $8 million. So I don't know if that's flexible to be or draw down some of that into the other area. It does seem a little loose in terms of its usability, and I'm wondering if that's another category that we can pull from.
Yeah. And so keep in mind that proposed, the draft application, it is available online. And whenever you submit that stakeholder input survey, make sure you're addressing those comments or concerns. And of course, you're always welcome to reach out directly to me, and we can kind of talk through different funding priorities. So, yeah, absolutely.
I move to adjourn.
I think a second to move to adjourn. Thank you, everyone. We will see you on June 17th at 9 a.m.